I talked to him about it. I asked him questions about it. I heard his side of the story, which no one has ever heard.
She spent nearly a decade playing the most beloved little girl on American television, a role so tender that audiences forgot there was a real child underneath the bonnet and the braids. For years, the world knew her only as Laura Ingalls, the pigtailed heroine of the Prairie, the girl Michael Landon affectionately called Half Pint. But the woman behind that image carried a far more complicated story, one shaped by a secret adoption, a father's death hidden from her for years, decades of addiction and self-doubt, and, in the most painful chapter of all, a husband now facing the darkest accusations imaginable. This is the real story of Melissa Gilbert, told honestly, at 62. Melissa Gilbert was born in Los Angeles on May 8, 1964, and her life was unusual from its very first hours. She was placed for adoption almost immediately and taken in the next day by actor Paul Gilbert and dancer-actress Barbara Crane. Show business wasn't something she discovered later in life. It was baked into her bloodline from the start. Her mother's father was Harry Crane, the writer credited with creating The Honeymooners. So Melissa arrived into a household already fluent in the rhythms of the entertainment industry. That world claimed her early. While other toddlers were still working out full sentences, Melissa was already appearing in television commercials, including a well-remembered Alpo dog food spot. The line between childhood and career blurred before she had any real chance to notice it was missing. But the deepest wound of her early years wasn't the work. It was a lie. For a long stretch of her childhood, Melissa was told her adoptive father had died of a stroke. She held onto that story for years, until she eventually learned the truth. He had taken his own life. The revelation devastated her. She has said that for months afterwards she couldn't eat or sleep properly, grieving a father she thought she'd already mourned, now forced to mourn him again under a completely different truth. It wasn't just loss. It was loss that had been deliberately concealed from her, and that kind of secrecy leaves its own separate scar. Her home life kept shifting under her feet. Her parents divorced when she was 6, and her mother's remarriage brought new relatives and a new household dynamic into a family that already looked, from the outside, like a glowing showbiz success story. The public saw a cheerful child actress. What they didn't see was a girl absorbing an adoption she hadn't chosen, a divorce she couldn't control, and a hidden tragedy she wasn't allowed to fully understand until much later. Everything changed in late 1973, when 9-year-old Melissa auditioned for a new NBC drama called Little House on the Prairie. Reportedly, around 500 girls were considered for the role of Laura Ingalls. Melissa won it. She filmed the pilot movie, which aired in the spring of 1974, and by that September the full series was underway. Michael Landon, already a household name from his years on Bonanza, personally signed off on her casting. He was in his late 30s at the time, and he quickly became far more than a co-star to her. On set, he functioned as a mentor and, in many ways, a substitute father figure, someone who filled a role that had been left painfully empty at home. For 9 years, from 1974 through 1983, Melissa was a fixture of the show, growing up on camera between the ages of 9 and 18. The production schedule was demanding, long days of filming in Simi Valley and on studio sound stages, with schooling squeezed into the bare legal minimum required for child performers in California. While most 9-year-olds worried about spelling tests, Melissa was carrying story arcs on one of the biggest family dramas on network television. As the show's popularity grew, so did the weight of her public image. Landon's nickname for her, Half Pint, stuck both on-screen and off, and audiences came to see her not just as an actress playing a character, but as the character herself, sweet, wholesome, endlessly good-natured. Melissa later admitted that inhabiting Laura sometimes felt like an escape from her real life, but it also became a kind of cage. People expected the same warmth and gentleness from her in person that they saw from Laura every week, and it took her years to feel comfortable acknowledging that gap between the girl on screen and the more complicated person living underneath. There was also a strange kind of loneliness built into the job itself. Melissa has spoken about how odd it felt to spend her formative years surrounded by a rotating crew of adults, directors, producers, tutors, wardrobe staff, while her actual friendships outside the studio gates struggled to keep pace with a schedule built around call sheets rather than sleepovers. Fame gave her access to rooms most children never see, but it also meant she rarely had the ordinary, unremarkable experience of simply being a kid without an audience watching. Even her mistakes played out under a kind of quiet observation, filtered through a public that had already decided who she was supposed to be. By the time the series ended in 1983, with follow-up television movies stretching into 1984, Melissa was a bona fide teen icon. She had a Golden Globe nomination from 1981 and multiple Young Artist honors on her resume. But the fame didn't answer the question that was starting to form inside her. Where did Laura end, and where did Melissa begin? Her 20s threw her into a world about as far from Walnut Grove as it was possible to get. She dated Rob Lowe, moved in circles associated with the so-called Brat Pack, and found herself at parties alongside rock stars like Billy Idol. On the surface, it looked like liberation. Underneath, Melissa was still fighting to be taken seriously as something other than the child in braids that America had watched grow up. She pursued that seriousness deliberately. At just 15, while still very much branded as America's half pint, she took on the physically and emotionally demanding role of Helen Keller in a New York stage production of The Miracle Worker. It was nothing like the gentle world of Little House, and for Melissa it served as proof, to herself as much as to the industry, that she could handle material with real weight. She kept pushing toward darker, more adult work throughout the 1980s. In 1983's television film Choices of the Heart, she portrayed one of 4 American churchwomen murdered in El Salvador in 1980. In 1987's Blood Vows, she played the wife of a mob figure, navigating a plot thick with crime and betrayal. These weren't accidental choices. They were a deliberate campaign to be recognized as a dramatic actress with range, not a former child star doomed to replay the same wholesome part forever. Still, shaking off Laura Ingalls proved harder than landing new roles ever was. In the early 1990s, she headlined 2 primetime series as an adult performer: the Fox sitcom Stand By Your Man, which ran for 19 episodes before cancellation, and the NBC legal drama Sweet Justice, in which she played an attorney, which also lasted just 1 season. Both were real opportunities. Neither fully dislodged the public's first impression of her. It's a familiar bind for performers who become famous as children. The very thing that opens every door later becomes the thing standing in front of every other door. Casting directors saw a track record. Audiences saw a memory. Melissa has reflected that no matter how different a role was on paper, reviewers and viewers alike tended to measure her against a 9-year-old on the prairie, as if that performance had somehow frozen her range in place. Working through that perception took not just talent, but patience. The kind of patience that doesn't pay off in a single defining role, but accumulates slowly across decades of choices, some of which succeed and plenty of which quietly don't. That accumulated pressure eventually spilled onto the page. In her 2009 memoir, Prairie Tale, Melissa, then 45, pulled back the curtain on decades of polished public image. She wrote candidly about feeling empty despite years of adoration, about struggling with addiction, about failed marriages, about cosmetic procedures she came to regret, and about a persistent sense of not measuring up inside an industry obsessed with a narrow idea of beauty. She has said her struggles with alcohol didn't actually begin during her Little House years, but emerged later, in her late 30s, following grief and accumulated emotional stress. After her grandfather's death, she began drinking to help herself sleep, and the habit escalated until she was reportedly consuming as much as 2 bottles of wine some nights, alongside misuse of prescription medication. A humiliating low point, passing out in front of a friend, became the wake-up call that pushed her into therapy and Alcoholics Anonymous. She has said she reached sobriety around 2004. Financial trouble followed not long after. Reports from 2015 indicated she owed roughly $360,000 in back federal taxes, on top of an earlier debt of about $112,000 reported in 2013. Even as she worked to rebuild her public and financial standing, she kept writing. In 2014, she released 2 very different books: Daisy and Josephine, a children's story about a shy girl and her dog that quietly echoed some of her own childhood loneliness, and My Prairie Cookbook, blending recipes with behind-the-scenes memories and photographs from her Little House years so warm nostalgic project that also hinted at how much she still longed for the simplicity of home after decades inside a controlled Hollywood machine. Her public life took a different turn in 2001 when she was elected president of the Screen Actors Guild, defeating Valerie Harper in a closely contested race. She took office during a tense period for the union, in the aftermath of a lengthy strike the previous year and ongoing disputes over non-union and overseas production work. She was re-elected in 2003 and served until 2005, becoming one of the relatively few former child stars to move from acting fame into serious union leadership. Melissa's relationship with her own appearance shifted gradually, and every stage left its mark. Not long after turning 18, she underwent rhinoplasty, hoping for a look better suited to the camera. Dissatisfied with the initial healing, she had it redone. That first procedure opened the door to more. Breast implants followed, and by the 2000s she had added Botox, fillers, and other cosmetic maintenance in an effort to keep the kind of appearance casting directors still wanted to see. Looking back, she has said that the more she tried to refine her face, the less it actually felt like her own. The pressure intensified with age. By her 40s, she has said she felt trapped inside an industry culture that reduced a woman's value to dress size and the visibility of a few lines on camera, despite having worked in that same industry since she was 9 years old. After her divorce in 2011, the cosmetic maintenance became even more constant. Botox, fillers, laser treatments, and hair dye turned into routine upkeep, until she has said she began to feel like the woman in the mirror was someone built out of fear rather than someone who was simply her. In interviews around 2024 and 2025, she was blunt about her disdain for the phrase anti-aging, arguing that the term itself implies aging is something to be defeated rather than lived through, essentially equating growing older with something to be ashamed of. The real turning point came around 2013, the year she left Los Angeles. She has said plainly that she felt she had to leave the city in order to actually let herself age. Around the same period, after marrying actor Timothy Busfield, she began scaling back the cosmetic routines, cutting her hair, stepping away from Botox and fillers. In 2015, she announced she was having her breast implants removed, citing health concerns. Living first in rural Michigan and later on a restored 14-acre former hunting cabin in upstate New York, she found that much of the old pressure simply fell away once she was no longer surrounded by it daily. She let her hair go naturally gray, stopped chasing cosmetic maintenance altogether, and has said that when she looks in the mirror now, she finally sees herself rather than a performance. It wasn't an overnight transformation, so much as a slow unlearning. For years she had carried what she has described as a constant mental checklist. No visible gray, no lines caught by a camera flash, no fluctuation in weight that might invite comment. Stepping away from Los Angeles didn't erase that internalized checklist immediately, but it removed the daily reinforcement that had kept it running. Without red carpets, without constant industry proximity, without the visual comparison of an entire town built around a narrow standard of youth, she found room to simply exist in a body that was aging the way bodies naturally do. She has since described that shift less as giving something up and more as finally getting something back. Melissa's romantic history reads like its own long search for steadiness. On February 26, 1988, at 23, she married actor Bo Brinkman just 7 weeks after ending a highly publicized engagement to Rob Lowe. On May 1, 1989, she gave birth to their son, Dakota Paul Brinkman, during a period she has since linked to untreated alcoholism and emotional turmoil. That marriage, marked by infidelity and volatile arguments, ended in divorce in 1994, a chapter she has described without nostalgia, calling it simply chaotic. Her second marriage carried different hopes. On January 1, 1995, she married actor Bruce Boxleitner, following a courtship that had already weathered its share of complications. Later that year, on October 6, 1995, they welcomed a son, Michael Garrett Boxleitner, named in honor of Michael Landon, underscoring just how much emotional significance she still attached to the man who had shaped her childhood. Even so, old patterns resurfaced. Melissa has acknowledged that she continued drinking to cope and continued searching for a sense of safety that the marriage alone couldn't provide. After 16 years together, The couple separated in 2010 and divorced in 2011. Then, in 2012, at 47, she met 55-year-old Timothy Busfield at a bar in Los Angeles. Both were rebuilding after divorce. Both had grown children from previous marriages. Both had spent decades in public life. What drew them together, by her account, was a sense of calm. No games, no performance. Just two people who recognized steadiness when they finally found it. The relationship moved quickly. An engagement by early 2013, and a small private wedding on April 24, 2013, at a ranch in Santa Barbara, where Melissa notably wore red instead of white, a symbolic nod to the fact that this marriage was never meant to represent innocence, but experience. Afterward, the couple deliberately stepped back from Los Angeles, settling first in Michigan and later in the Catskills, building a public image centered on gardening, simple living, and a shared creative partnership under the name Modern Prairie. For years, their story read as a hard-won third act, proof that even after very public pain, a quieter kind of happiness was possible. That image was upended in January 2026. Timothy Busfield, then 68, was arrested in New Mexico after allegations surfaced involving two 11-year-old twin boys connected to the Fox series, The Cleaning Lady, a production Busfield had directed and appeared in. According to a criminal complaint, one of the boys reported that Busfield had touched him inappropriately over his clothing on separate occasions when he was 7 and 8 years old, and his twin brother also reported being touched, though he did not specify further. The complaint reportedly noted that a therapist had documented the child describing nightmares related to the alleged abuse, and that hospital staff had raised concerns about the boys potentially being groomed. In early February 2026, a Bernalillo County grand jury in Albuquerque indicted Busfield on 4 counts of criminal sexual contact of a minor. He pleaded not guilty on February 11th. Busfield has consistently and forcefully denied the allegations, describing them in a recorded statement as lies and insisting he would be fully exonerated. His attorney has argued that the prosecution's case is fundamentally weak. Busfield was released from custody pending trial after roughly a week in jail, with dozens of letters of support submitted on his behalf. His trial is currently scheduled for May 2027. Under the law, he remains presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. For nearly 2 months after the indictment, Melissa Gilbert said nothing publicly. Then, on April 6, 2026, she sat down with George Stephanopoulos for an interview on Good Morning America, her first public statement since her husband's arrest. She described the preceding months as the most traumatizing experience of their lives, saying their life as they knew it was already gone regardless of the trial's outcome. She spoke of grieving plans, dreams, and projects that had once defined their future together, and said that for Busfield, the damage to his reputation felt permanent, that even if he were eventually exonerated, the accusation itself would follow him forever. At the same time, she made her personal position unmistakably clear. She told Stephanopoulos she knew her husband down to his core, that she trusted him completely with the safety of her own children and grandchildren, and that if she believed for even a moment he had hurt a child, he would have far more to worry about than any prison sentence. When asked why she chose to speak out at that particular moment, after weeks of legal advice to stay silent, her answer was simple. It was time. Her defense of him divided public opinion immediately, as these moments so often do. Some viewers saw the unwavering loyalty of a wife, standing by someone she has known for over a decade. Others saw a mother whose priorities, in a case involving alleged child victims, deserved harder scrutiny. Both reactions sat inside the same televised interview, and neither one erased the other. What remained true, regardless of where any individual viewer landed, was that the legal process was still ongoing, the allegations were still allegations, and a jury, not the court of public opinion, would ultimately decide what happened on that set between 2022 and 2024. Alongside these public battles, Melissa has spent years contending with serious physical pain. In March 2012, at 47, she competed on season 14 of Dancing with the Stars, partnered with Maxim Shmerkovsky. During a performance in April of that year, she fell and struck her head, finishing the routine before being taken from the studio by ambulance. She was later diagnosed with a concussion and whiplash, compounding neck problems that had already been building for years, including the lasting effects of a broken back in 2001 and spinal fusion surgery in 2010. Still, she returned to competition and ultimately finished in 5th place. By 2019, she was describing chronic nerve pain radiating from her neck into her arms, along with numbness and disrupted sleep. In November 2020, at 56, she underwent surgery to remove old spinal hardware and repair deteriorating discs. Health scares continued. In June 2023, what looked like a minor insect bite on her arm rapidly developed into cellulitis with an abscess, requiring emergency treatment and intravenous antibiotics after doctors warned the infection could otherwise have entered her bloodstream. In 2024, at 60, she also finally identified something that had quietly affected her since childhood: misophonia, a neurological condition that produces extreme distress in response to specific sounds. She has described sitting in classroom scenes on a little house set decades earlier, flooded with panic by the sound of other children chewing gum or tapping their nails, and spending years assuming there was simply something wrong with her temperament. After reaching out to Duke University's Center for Misophonia and Emotion Regulation in 2023, she went through 16 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy and has since spoken publicly to raise awareness of the condition. By her 60s, Melissa Gilbert had become someone quite different from the polished ingenue Hollywood once built. In 2022, she launched Modern Prairie, a lifestyle brand aimed at women over 50, built around the same simplicity she had found after leaving Los Angeles: gardening, home cooking, and an unfiltered approach to appearing on camera without heavy makeup or cosmetic enhancement. She began speaking openly about menopause and the physical realities of aging, framing them not as something to conceal, but as evidence of a life fully lived. When she turned 60 in May 2024, she said it was the most incredible year of her life, and that she had earned every line and scar that came with it. She also kept acting, choosing roles that matched her actual age rather than chasing youth. In the off-Broadway play Still, she played a woman in her mid-60s confronting a romance from decades earlier, opposite Mark Moses, a role she has said felt more honest and more radical for someone her age than pretending to still be 40. Health milestones kept arriving alongside the personal ones. After years of chronic pain, she reported feeling significantly better within weeks of her 2020 spinal surgery. In her early 60s, she shared that she was cancer-free, and in December 2025 she partnered with the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, a cause with deep personal meaning. Michael Landon, the man who shaped so much of her childhood, died of pancreatic cancer in 1991 at the age of 54. It's worth sitting with how strange this particular chapter is, even against the backdrop of everything that came before it. Melissa Gilbert has spent her entire adult life learning, slowly and often painfully, how to separate herself from other people's expectations, from Laura Ingalls, from Hollywood's beauty standards, from the version of wholesome that fans projected onto her for decades. And now, in the very years she finally arrived at a version of herself she recognized in the mirror, she has been pulled into a story that isn't really about her at all, yet will inevitably shape how the rest of her life is remembered. She isn't the one facing charges. She isn't the one whose name appears on the indictment, but she is the one who chose, publicly and deliberately, to attach her own credibility to her husband's defense, knowing full well that the outcome of a trial more than a year away could validate that choice or complicate it in ways she can't control. That tension between personal loyalty and public accountability, between the presumption of innocence the law guarantees and the discomfort many feel simply hearing the accusations, isn't something a single interview can resolve, and it isn't something this story can resolve either. What can be said honestly is this: the allegations against Timothy Busfield are serious. They're working their way through a formal legal process, and a trial currently scheduled for May 2027 will ultimately determine what a jury believes actually happened on that set. Nothing here should be read as a verdict, because there isn't one yet. Melissa Gilbert's life has never fit neatly into the image America first fell in love with. Behind the bonnet was a girl navigating adoption and a hidden family tragedy. Behind the adult actress was a woman fighting addiction, financial strain, and an industry's narrow definition of worth. And now, in her 60s, a decade she has otherwise described as her most honest yet. She finds herself standing beside a husband facing some of the gravest allegations a person can face, insisting on his innocence while acknowledging that, win or lose in court, some things may never be repaired. At 62, Melissa Gilbert isn't performing for anyone anymore. She's simply telling the truth as she has lived it, messy, painful, and entirely her own.